Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. A lot is happening on the Browns approach the preseason finale Saturday and the season opener 2 weeks after that. Joe Flacco is officially the starter. Shedeur Sanders is back practicing. Isaiah Bond signed. Quinshon Judkins hasn't. And Myles Garrett isn't talking about his latest speeding ticket for going 100 miles an hour. Here to discuss the state of the Browns, as always, is Dave Chudowsky of the WKYC Morning News. Hey, Chud.
Scott, we have so much going on. We could have done two pods last week and probably two this week. I mean, there's it's go time now, I mean, we're getting into the crunch time with so much on the field and off.
There's no doubt, I like to keep the focus as much as possible on football. It's impossible to do that, Chud. But we have the preseason finale Saturday at 1 o'clock at Huntington Bank Field. You're going to get to see Joe Flacco. You're going to get to see at least most of the starters. We don't know how long we're taping this. Thursday morning, Kevin Stefanski is going to give some kind of, landscape of how he's going to handle the reps later today. But he's played the starters in the past in that preseason dress rehearsal. He's going to do it again. That doesn't mean Myles Garrett, maybe he doesn't play, maybe a Joe Bitonio doesn't play, but you're going to see Joe Flacco, you're going to see the majority of the starters, and then it's 2 weeks to the opener. And, that's really is crunch time, Chud, and it's can you get everybody healthy that you need to get healthy, and we'll go into that. Can you get Isaiah Bond up to speed? Can you get Joe Flacco as comfortable as possible because he didn't get a ton of reps early in training camp and has gotten more lately, but it's all about getting ready for week one. We've talked about it. It's a huge stretch to start the season. 6 really difficult games, a really difficult
Yeah.
stretch. You start with Joe Burrow and the Bengals week one at Cleveland, and they need to get off to a good start. So it really is ramping up. It's going to feel like a little bit of a dead time here once this Rams game is over because there's 2 weeks and then the players get a little break over Labor Day, but it really is going to intensify.
Yeah, I was listening to a national show where they were trying to come up with a win for the Browns in the first 6 games, and they're just saying that, they likely could be 0-6 to start the year if they don't beat the Bengals in week one. So you're right, not a favorable start to the schedule. But let's start on the field instead of off, because the biggest topic, last year the biggest topic from January on, it's like all you heard was Deshaun Watson, and can he be the old Deshaun Watson? Well, this year it was who's going to be the starting quarterback out of the four guys once you got four. But early before the draft, it was, well, who's going to be the guy? And then you get Pickett, you get Flacco, you get 2 draft picks. So the talk since the draft has been, how's this four going to play out? What order? Well, we now know Joe Flacco is the guy. You've had him number one in your ranking pretty much the entire time during training camp. I told you I felt since mini camp that just the way that they treated him in mini camp, I just got a vibe that he'd be the guy. And not saying he was, but once Pickett
Yeah.
got hurt, that kind of, really put Flacco into the forefront. So I guess the bottom line is I'm yapping away, but not a surprise. Joe Flacco's your starting quarterback in week one.
It's not. And we don't know how it would have played out if Kenny Pickett had stayed healthy. Chud, I felt like Joe Flacco was a better option. I don't know if the team or the coaches, I should say, always felt like that. We've talked about it. Kenny Pickett's much younger than Joe Flacco. The Browns think there's some upside there. If it had been close, would they have gone with Kenny Pickett? They like his mobility. It never got there because the hamstring July 26th effectively ended the competition. So, we'll see. Maybe we see Kenny Pickett this year. It's too early to tell. We talked about that difficult 6 game stretch. But I think Joe Flacco should be the starting quarterback. I think he gives the Browns the best chance to win week one and week two and week three. And I think his teammates feel that way. And talking to guys like Myles Garrett and Joel Bitonio, like nobody's dissing any of the other guys in the quarterback competition. But there is a comfort level with Joe Flacco. And I don't know if I need to say this, but the reasons are he's played in the league. This is his 18th year. He's won a ton of games, thrown for a ton of yards, was a Super Bowl MVP, won a Super Bowl. And then in 2023, he comes in here and has a great December to get this team to the playoffs. So it's a long track record. It's all you got to do is go back a year and a half to the end of 2023, and you know how effective he can be. Not a perfect quarterback obviously throws too many interceptions, isn't the most fleet of foot, is 40 years old. That's a concern, but he still throws it great. Still 6'6", still leads really well, knows everything, has seen everything a defense can throw at you. So I just think it makes the most sense. And whether or not the Browns would have made that decision if Pickett had been healthy, I think it worked out the best for the chances for them to win games early in this season.
Yeah, Scott, what do you say to the people though? Because there are a lot of people that think, well, the Browns are going nowhere this year. They're not going to be a winning team. Why put Flacco in there? Why not see what you have with these rookies?
Well, there's a couple of points there, Chud, and that's a legitimate question. And everywhere I go, after softball or fantasy football draft, that's the question I get, I think, more than anything. And my answer is there's 52 other guys on this roster, or if you take the quarterbacks out of it, there's going to be 49 other guys on this roster. And it can't all be about finding out who your quarterback is long term. Like that, the NFL seasons are too precious. Myles Garrett, he doesn't. How many seasons does he have left? Joe Batoni, this could be his last season. He chooses to come back and not retire. And it's not so, hey, let's go get a look at Dylan Gabriel and Shadur Sanders. You have to try to win games in this league. And I truly believe that. I think the Browns, as an organization, are operating like that. Now, does that change if you're 0-6? Certainly. But it doesn't change week one. And the margin is so thin in this league, it's not impossible to envision a scenario where the Browns win 9 or 10 games and get into the playoffs. And that would count as a huge success. And I think the only way that happens is if you start Joe Flacco. And I just don't think you can start a season saying we're going to look at our rookies, especially when they're third round and fifth round picks. It's not like you drafted a guy number one like Tennessee and Cam Ward. So I think that's number one. And number two is I just don't think the rookies are ready. You could think the Browns might be able to make an argument that Dylan Gabriel is closer to being ready. But I don't think he is. And given those two things, it makes sense to me. I think it's the only option is to play Joe Flacco. Now, like I said, at some point that spectrum can shift. And if you're losing or if Flacco gets hurt, yes, there is a reality of, hey, you want to see these rookie quarterbacks. Not if you're in playoff contention, but if the season's a disaster, yeah, then why not? You owe it to yourself as a team, especially with 2 first-round picks next year. But right now, it needs to be about winning, and I think that's the only way you can approach it.
So who's going to be the backup? Where are we at with that? When are we going to find out? Who do you think it's going to be? How does the rest of the 4 play out? And do they keep all 4 guys?
I think they do. The only way that they don't keep 4 is if they're confident, or there's two ways. They're confident Dylan Gabriel can be the backup because I've seen nothing to make me think they don't trust Dylan Gabriel more than Shadur Sanders. So do they think that if Joe Flacco gets hurt week one, however that happens, pulls a hamstring, takes a shot to the ribs, whatever, can you put Dylan Gabriel in and trust him and believe that he can go win games? And, Kevin Stefanski says each year is different, but I certainly think the organization is scarred or should be scarred from what happened with DTR a couple of years ago when Deshaun Watson gets hurt early. They got to go to DTR. They traded Joshua Dobbs, and DTR wasn't close to being ready. So I'm not saying Dylan Gabriel and DTR are the same player. I'm just saying that experience should have an impact. So you have to trust Dylan Gabriel. I don't think they're quite there yet. He missed that first preseason game. That's valuable experience. And then if some team made a really good offer for Kenny Pickett, then the Browns probably say, okay, we'll just go with the rookies as the backups. I don't think that's going to happen. So that's why I think there's going to be 4, is because in case something happens to Joe Pickett or Joe Flacco early, they want Kenny Pickett available to step in.
So going back to Flacco, a couple things that he said kind of stood out. He talked about just how he feels good. He talked about Tom Brady kind of setting the stage for the age factor for him playing as old as he is. I mean, not that he's old, but in football he is football age. And then he talked about just getting more reps, and that kind of stood out to me. And I don't remember his exact quote, Scott, but something along the lines of just now that he's been named the guy, and now they're getting, he's going to play in this week's game. He's getting more reps. Do you feel like he's been happy with how they handled this competition, and has he gotten enough reps? I mean, is Flacco going to be ready? Can you just base it on, oh, he's a veteran, so he'll be ready? You know what I mean?
I do. I like that question, Chud. I think he understands why he didn't get a ton of reps early, and it's a four-man quarterback competition, or was a four-man quarterback competition. And he is the 40-year-old who needs less reps, and he admitted that, but he would want as many as possible. And he said he got more comfortable when Pickett got hurt because all of a sudden he's getting more reps. So then you get into a comfort level. You get some chemistry with Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku, who he had chemistry with from 2023. But you start to get comfortable. And he was asked when they were in Philly, practicing against the Eagles, about Jalen Hurts getting 90% of the reps. He said, yeah, that's ideal. That's how you get the offense to click at its highest level, is when the quarterback can get that many reps. But he said that's not the reality, and I'm paraphrasing. We're in a different situation than the Eagles are. So he acknowledged that, but now it's been, okay, he's gotten more just given the injury circumstances, and now he's going to get even more. And he should continue to get even more. And I think the Browns would be doing a disservice to him and the team if they siphon some of those reps for the younger guys in practice, whether it's leading up to the opener or once the regular season starts. I think that's a bad idea. I think you have to commit fully to Joe Flacco and getting him ready. And I think they'll do that, but it's a question worth asking.
Let's hit on all three guys real quick here. Kenny Pickett, injured still. How is he doing with the injury? He will not play on Saturday, correct? Where are we at with him?
Yeah, he came back to team drills. Let me get my days right here, Chud. Tuesday. He came back to team drills Tuesday and then sat out Wednesday. And Stefanski said that was just part of the plan, and they're trying to get the guys ready for the preseason finale. And then he said, and Kenny's not going to play in the preseason finale, which was a little bit of news there because I think the hope had been maybe he could play against the Rams. They're not going to play him. It speaks to the severity of the hamstring injury. We're talking, it's going to be a month now. So, do I think he can be ready week one to be the backup? Yes. Do I think that's a guarantee? No. And Stefanski is not ready to announce the quarterback depth chart behind Joe Flacco. And that's probably part of it, is they don't know about Pickett's hamstring. Is he going to be ready to go September 7th against the Bengals? And then the other part of that is, what if they trade him? I remember him announcing Joshua Dobbs as the number 2, and then he gets traded hours later, I think. So I think they're going to be careful about that. But that's where Pickett stands. I expect him to be the backup week one. It's not a guarantee. Gabriel seems to be fine off that hamstring. Probably not 100%, but fine. Played against the Eagles, came through it well. And then Sanders didn't practice Tuesday. They gave him an extra day with that strained oblique. And then he practiced Wednesday, was in team drills. We got to watch practice. The rules are a little different. You're not allowed to report on a bunch of things. But look good throwing it. The Browns put out a clip on social media of him making a real good deep fade route throw to Cade McDonald, who made a real good over-the-shoulder catch. He made a good throw on the next play. So I didn't notice anything with the oblique affecting the way Sanders threw the ball. Stefanski said he was a little bit limited. We'll see Thursday if he practices and if Stefanski says he can play Saturday. Because I think the Browns would like to see Flacco play, let's call it a quarter and a half, and then the other two rookies split the rest of the game.
And Scott, let's be honest, a lot can change between now and when they need to make the decision or when the regular season starts. I mean, one of these guys could be hurt and it just kind of plays out in that direction,
Sure. And, we have cuts come Tuesday, Chud. So that's a cut from 90 to 53. Again, that's not the final 53-man roster. Things can happen. You could keep 4 quarterbacks and then trade one. You could keep 4 quarterbacks and cut one like they did last year with Tyler Huntley. But I do expect them to keep all 4. But, yeah, injuries are certainly a factor in how all of this is playing out.
Yeah. How big of a deal is the Sanders injury? Because that kind of was a touch bit surprising last week. he comes off,
Yeah.
a pretty good performance, and people were, pretty high on him. How big of a deal do you think that was in his mission
Yeah.
to, further himself in this battle?
Sure. I think it was big. The fact that he didn't get to play against the Eagles, because I think he would have played a half, Chud. Um, and if he had built on what he did against Carolina, that would have been another point for him to make. Like, hey, I'm closer to being ready than you think I am, as coaches or as an organization. I put two good games together, and he just didn't have the chance to do that. So I think it robbed him of a chance. I don't think he was going to leapfrog Dylan Gabriel in the quarterback depth chart. I just don't think that's going to happen. They think Gabriel is ahead. They think he makes a bunch of good decisions. He was more NFL ready when they drafted him, all the things we've talked about, and that hasn't changed. But I do think they like how Shedeur Sanders has performed in practice. He's certainly thrown it really well, and that carried over to that Carolina game. So, not only did the fans get robbed of another chance to see him and the excitement that generates and the millions of fans that Shedeur has that are really vocal, it cost him a chance to build on that and to show everybody that he's closer, because the last thing is these reps are shrinking. After this game, let's assume he plays against the Rams. After this, he's not going to get any game repetitions. I mean, who knows when the next time he plays in a game is? Is it this year? Is it week 12? Is it week 15? You don't know. And is the fourth quarterback in the depth chart, he's not going to get a bunch of reps in practice either.
Yeah. How do you think it's going to shape out on Saturday? You said Flacco quarter and a half. How would you kind of envision it going? And obviously, it wouldn't hold you to it.
Right. And well, I think we'll have a better idea. Like I said, later today, Stefanski's gonna, announce whatever. Who knows how much he's gonna divulge. But yeah, I think the starters play quarter and a half. Could they play the whole first half? Sure, depending on how many reps. I just, they walk a fine line between you want to get them game reps. We've talked about more intensity, more urgency, be ready for week one, versus you don't want a guy spraining an ankle or pulling a hamstring 2 weeks before the season. So you walk that line. I think Flacco wants the reps. There's other players that want the reps. I don't know if Joe Bitonio plays, like I mentioned, Myles Garrett. Denzel Ward, we'll talk about him, but certainly he won't play. I don't know if he ever would have played with the shoulder injury that he suffered earlier this week. So I think they'll be careful with certain of their starters, but generally you'll see all the starters out there for limited time. And I think that includes the rookies, Mason Graham and Carson Schwessinger, Dylan Sampson, Harold Fenton Jr. They played in the Carolina game, didn't play against the Eagles. I think they'll play again against the Rams.
All right, Scott. Well, no doubt we were going to talk a lot about the quarterbacks, which we have. Before we finish up, what did you think about Gabriel's play? I mean, there was a lot of debate about that in his game against the Eagles. Obviously, he had the pick six. Some people are saying, or Stefanski says, there's more that goes into that than him just throwing an interception. He drove him down the field. I mean, I guess, would you call it up and down? What were your thoughts? Did he impress you at all? Did he gain any positivity out of Petrak when it comes to him?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chud. I thought it was more up than down. Obviously, two big mistakes, and Kevin Stefanski's talking so much about the need to eliminate turnovers. And they had the pick six, which wasn't all his fault. The receivers, it looked like Deontay Johnson got shoved too close to Blake Whiteheart, and maybe Blake Whiteheart was too deep. They're supposed to be on certain levels. But I think Gabriel still shouldn't have thrown the pass. And I know Whiteheart pulled his arms back because he thought the ball was going to Johnson. There was a lot wrong on that play, but I don't think Gabriel should have tried to force the ball in there. So that's a big play, pick six, obviously. And then they botched the handoff, trying to get it to Pierre Strong. And, is part of that Gabriel's fault? Sure. Is part of it Strong's fault? Maybe. But those are two big plays. And, I don't know if it's fair or not, Chud, but I think you have to do it. I think you have to compare Gabriel and Sanders. We've been doing it all along. So Sanders didn't have those. He didn't have those two big mistakes. And Sanders threw 2 touchdowns while Gabriel did. So that's why I would give the edge to Sanders. But Gabriel was certainly solid. I thought he made a bunch of good decisions, which is, his calling card. I thought he threw it accurately, probably more accurately than Sanders, even though Sanders' best throws were really accurate throws. And Gabriel was at his best on third down, and that matters. I think they started 6 for 6 on third down as a team, and he made some really nice throws, a really good out route to Jamari Thrash. I think that was the first third down conversion. So there was a lot to like. And I thought, I've talked about it on here. I didn't think Gabriel looked good in training camp. And a lot of that was accuracy issues. And he looked way better in that Philly game.
Yeah, I saw something online, Scott. I didn't click on it and I didn't really investigate it. But someone had said that, Sanders threw a touchdown or made a play on the exact same play as the Gabriel interception. Is that true? Were they the exact same play, or is that just kind of a clickbait type thing?
No, that's interesting. I can't say that it was the same play, but it's certainly similar. The concept was similar. And they run that a lot. It's, the bootleg rollout, and then it's levels. You have a guy, let's say, line of scrimmage, and a guy at 8 yards and a guy at 16 yards. And I'm just using random numbers there. But you have layers, and then the quarterback decides which depth he's going to throw to, depending on where the coverage is. So that was the same concept that they ran on that first touchdown to Caden Davis in the left corner of the end zone in Carolina. Now, Gabriel, and part of his spike is he's left-handed, but he had rolled out farther to the left. Sanders just kind of moved to the left. It wasn't in the end zone, so there's variables there, but the concept was certainly the same.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on to the other big talkers, because we have quite a few of them, all right, we do. Let's just put a wrap on that Eagles game. What are the headlines or anything else that came out of those practices against the Eagles and the game itself? Anything in the game that really stood out to you? Maybe a guy separated from someone else, or anything that came out of that game that our listeners need to know?
Yeah, I think the overall trip to Philly, Chud, and you include the game in there, is that this defense looks really good. And the defensive line especially, it went up against Philly's big-time offensive line. Now, Philly was missing a couple starting guards, so you have to mention that. But Philly's still really good. They have two really good tackles. And the Browns, I think, beat the Eagles in practice. I mean, that's the reports out of practice, that the Browns' defensive line had 2 great days. And then the starters didn't play in that game on Saturday. But, the defense was really good there. They had a pick 6, and I think they let up 88 total yards. I know it's a preseason game, and I probably shouldn't even be quoting stats, but the defense was good. And we've talked about it. They need to be good. If this team's going to exceed expectations, this defense needs to be good. And I thought the trip to Philly as an entirety was another step in that direction. The Browns defenses look good in Berea. It looked good in Philly. It should look good during the season. So I thought that was a positive. Just a couple of guys, Pierre Strong Jr., the running back, I mentioned the botched handoff with him. He played a ton, Chud, and I don't know how this running back room is going to shake out. Quinshon Judkins is not signed. It feels like the Browns are waiting for a decision by the NFL, or are they fighting about guaranteed money, or what happens if he gets suspended? I mean, the contract should be easy to figure out, but the arrest, which he's not going to be charged, so that felt like it did open up the possibility of him returning and signing with the Browns, but that hasn't happened, and we're a week into this. And I'm surprised that Judkins isn't here right now. So now is it a contract issue? Is it the Browns still have doubts? Is it they're just waiting to see what the suspension, if there's a suspension, the punishment from the league? So with him still being an unknown and a big uncertainty, how does this room shake out? You got Jerome Ford, you got rookie Dylan Sampson, and then you got undrafted rookie Imani Marshall. You have who am I forgetting here, Chud? Oh, and then you have Pierre Strong Jr., who we just talked about. So, it feels like they need a guy. Is Junk is that guy? Can they wait? Do they need to go trade for somebody when they have roster cuts next Tuesday? Do they pick up a running back? I think that's really interesting to see how it plays out. But my point is, Strong played a ton in that Eagles game. He had one really long run. Is he fighting for a spot? He's a really good special teamer. I kind of feel like he has a spot. Is he fighting for carries in the backfield? So I thought that was interesting. And a takeaway is that he played a bunch and he had one big run, and I thought looked pretty good. And then Buki Watson, down the radar guy, I think he's going to make this team at the linebacker spot. They've had injuries there, but in 2 games, he's shown up a bunch. And turnovers. We talked about not turning over on offense, getting turnovers on defense. I think he had a fumble recovery on a punt. He had an interception that was taken away by somebody lined up in the neutral zone. So I thought Buki Watson, who was a 6th-round pick a year ago, I don't think he was guaranteed a spot when the training camp started, and now I feel like he's on the roster.
All right, you ready to get to the off-the-field issues now?
Let's hit him.
All right. We got multiple here. Let's go in the order of how they happen. And I guess good news in the Junkins regard, as far as obviously the situation isn't a good one, the overall situation of it happening, but at least as far as from a football standpoint, a positive moving forward, right?
Well, I mean, that's the thing, Chud. And like when I was talking about the uncertainty in the running back room, I felt like that legal clarity we got a week ago was going to open the door for his return. And the fact that he's not here yet just leaves me scratching my head. And, I think it's certainly unrealistic to expect him to be ready to go week 1, which I thought he'd be your starter week 1, before the arrest. So, do the Browns know that he's going to be suspended so there's no urgency? Is it all a contract thing over guaranteed money? I mean, those rookie contracts are slotted. So, we know how much money he's going to make. So, or does the Browns investigation give them pause? I don't feel like that's the answer. Jimmy Haslam said that he was optimistic. This is before the legal situation was resolved, that he would be back and playing for the Browns. So I don't like that would be, down my list of possibilities, but I am surprised, if not stunned, that he has not been in Berea this week practice.
Haven't seen him at all, huh?
No, he's not. I mean, he's unsigned, so he's not allowed to be here, and he's not really allowed to talk to the coaches. But it feels like the hurdle was removed for him to sign. So, Adam Schefter had a tweet about, they're waiting, I think, for the league clarity to, figure out the contract. But I don't know if that's necessary. So I'm confounded by that.
So you're thinking that there would be some disciplinary action from the NFL. Is that the concern then?
Yeah. It's certainly still possible. I think there's a misconception or misunderstanding by some people that, okay, if you're cleared by the legal system, that means you got a green light to play. That's not the case. The league does its own investigation. It is not bound by the legal justice system. I think it might take that into account, but like Mike Hall pleaded down last year and still got a 5-game suspension. Deshaun Watson's a perfect example. He didn't face any legal ramifications, right? He was not indicted on any of those accusations of the sexual harassment and assault, and yet the league suspended him for 11 games. So, the league can do what it wants, and I certainly think that a discipline, which I would think would be a suspension, is in play. I checked with the league this week, and they said it's still, they're still reviewing everything. And the same goes for Isaiah Bond, Judd, the undrafted rookie receiver that they just signed, who the same day as Judkins got cleared, a Texas grand jury returned a no bill, so they don't indict him on a sexual assault charge, and that cleared him to sign. And then the Browns bring him in, but the league is still investigating that. So he faces potential discipline.
So that leads to the next topic. You've brought him up multiple times, Isaiah Bond. Yeah. All Browns fans know about this, right? So it's not like we're giving any new information here because it happened last week. But what I want to know is, are you surprised they did this? That they go and with everything they've dealt with in their past, they go and get a guy who has issues regardless of whether they happen or not. It's still something that, and what is it, a 3-year deal, Scott?
Yeah, it's 3-year, fully guaranteed. I want to say 3.18 or 018, which is good money for an undrafted guy, but he also would have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick if he had been drafted. So that's certainly plays into it. Chud, I want to say I'm surprised, but I don't know how you can be when the Browns have had. It's you got to be careful how you phrase it. When the Browns have had guys on the roster with character questions, and when you go out and trade for Deshaun Watson in the midst of everything that was going on, and I know that they waited till there was no indictment, but obviously that didn't resolve the case, and people have strong opinions about Deshaun Watson's innocence or guilt. When you go sign a guy like that, then I think it opens the door for a lot. And, when they drafted Crenshaw Junkins, there were no red flags. They thought he was a clean prospect. And who knows, maybe he is, he's not going to be charged. Who knows? But, Mike Hall, there were questions about him coming out of Ohio State, and then he has an issue. Devin Bush Jr., the linebacker, he's awaiting a court case in Pennsylvania following an incident. So, yeah, so I'm not surprised. I think what it signals, Chud, is for a team that hasn't drafted well, you're trying to find talent anywhere you can. And that's the whole Watson thing, right? It was, okay, how are we going to find a franchise quarterback when they didn't believe Baker Mayfield was a franchise quarterback? So they went and traded for Deshaun Watson, and those guys don't come around very often. And they figured it was worth the risk. And I feel like with Isaiah Bond, it's a much less risk, obviously. But they say, okay, we haven't really drafted well at receiver. Anthony Schwartz was a bust, and, David Bell hasn't done much in his hurt, and Cedric Tillman, the jury's out on him. And, you can go down the list, and it's like, okay, we can get this guy without spending a draft pick and without signing some, a big money free agent. And maybe you, get a steal, right? A diamond in the rough kind of thing. Yep. And I feel like that's part of this is, hey, they got to figure out any way they can to acquire talent because they haven't been good enough in the normal venues for normal avenues for acquiring talent.
You know what it is? It's a desperate franchise.
Yeah. Right. And, and I do believe that Andrew Berry does a ton of research on the players. It doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean that they don't miss things. But I do believe that they spent a lot of time with Isaiah Bond, and Tommy Rees was his coordinator at Alabama in 2023. So they have some intel, and, they did their, the phrase, I hate using it, but it pops into your head, due diligence, right? I believe they did that. Now, does that mean it's the right move? No. Does it mean they won't be wrong? No. Andrew Berry put out a statement. He said they put him on a polygraph, which is weird to hear, an NFL GM talk about that. So, yeah, I agree, Chud. I think all teams in the league are desperate to some degree. I think the Browns are way more desperate given the failures they've had and the overall lack of success that they've had.
Any more comments on Bond? Not James, but Isaiah?
I'll just say he's fast. And, I've watched him practice 2 days now, and he's fast, and he's shown up in practice. And the fact that, he's going to be, he's making the team, right? They're not giving him the guaranteed money if he's not making the team. So that costs somebody else a roster spot, which is interesting. And I feel like he was going to have a role early on this team. I don't know. I'm not saying it's going to be a big role, but you will see him out there. You'll see packages of plays designed to use his speed. And Kevin Stefanski disagreed with me when I said I've seen more end arounds and jet sweeps this camp and preseason than they've ever done under him before. He said, no, I don't think so. And, maybe he's right. I feel like I've seen it more of them. And I also feel like they're in the playbook with Isaiah Bond in mind.
I saw you talk about that, write about that. So I'm glad you brought that up. What is the situation? So you mentioned it could cost someone else a spot. We talked last week about the possibility of the receivers that will make the roster. And I know you spend a lot of time on figuring out the roster.
Sure.
What about Deontay? How has he looked overall? For someone who hasn't seen him at all in camp or any preseason games, what are your thoughts on him, and will he make the team?
It's another great question, Chud. To me, I'm going to say he is the biggest question mark for me whether or not he makes this roster. I'm not convinced he will. I think I'm leaning toward yes. And part of that is because they've quote unquote put up with him this long. Like if they knew that he wasn't going to be the guy and make this team, then why even have him here? But I think they're hoping that he shows them something and that yes, that he proves that he's worthy of a roster spot because certainly he's talented enough. You mentioned up and down earlier. He's had an up and down camp to me. I thought he was invisible the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 days. Then he started to pop, and then I think he disappeared again. He had a bad couple of days in Philly, a drop. I think he had a drop to turn into a pick, a wrong route run. Hasn't done a lot in the games, and he's played a decent amount in the games. And then he'll show back up. So I don't know. Right now, like I said, I'm leaning toward him on the team. I think he has way more upside than a guy like Gage Larverdin, who could be the beneficiary of Johnson not making the roster. But I'm not behind the scenes, and maybe the coaches are done with him. Who knows, right? Like that's a question mark with him. It's a lot about is he mentally prepared to play, given all the crap that he put all his teams through last year.
Well, I think you make a great point about that why would they keep him around this long? That's an excellent point. The only thing I'll counter that with is if it's Bond that takes his spot.
Right. And they didn't have Bond until last week. Yeah. That's certainly, that's certainly a logical explanation. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens because it's not like they're deep at receiver, Chud. And Jamari Thrash has looked fine, or better than fine. He's looked good in year 2. Jerry Jeudy's looked great. Cedric Tillman has been inconsistent, which is the story of his career, and now he's got a brace/cast on his thumb. Stefanski said it's not a big deal, that he'll be okay, but so he probably won't play Saturday. So it's Jerry Jeudy and a bunch of question marks, and now Isaiah Bond's one of those question marks, and yes, Deontay Johnson will be one of those question marks too, but he is a Pro Bowler, right? He's caught a bunch of balls in this league. I would lean toward keeping him, and that's not knowing what he's like behind the scenes.
I was going to go to Myles Garrett next. I'm going to save Myles for last. Let's talk about real quick. What are you looking for here in the dress rehearsal? That's what we're calling this. What do you look for here in this final game? We already talked about the starters playing.
Yep.
How many jobs and battles are on the line, and what should fans really focus on?
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I'll just say, you want to see Joe Flacco complete some passes, right, and look comfortable and be ready, feel good going into week 1. I think I want to see the Mason Grahams and Carson Schwessingers, those rookies that played against Carolina, didn't play against Philly, just see them show up again. And they both did in that Carolina game. They have in practice. I don't think it's necessary, but I think that'd be a nice sign to see them play well. And then the jobs, Judd, and this leads me into the Denzel Ward discussion, is corner is a little bit of a mess right now. And we talk about this defense leading this team. You can't do it with a bad cornerback group. So they need to figure that out. And Denzel Ward left practice Tuesday. He fell on his shoulder. Kevin Stefanski said he's doing well, not a long-term thing. And he got asked directly about week 1, and he kind of hemmed and hawed a little bit and then said, doing well day-to-day should be. So, I don't think that's an automatic. He'll be there week 1, but it means he's not going to miss. They're not expecting him to miss a big chunk of the season. They need Denzel Ward. Like we talk about indispensable players on this roster. He's in the top. He's in the top 5. He might be number 1. Like we could have an argument about the importance of Denzel Ward to this team. So let's assume he's healthy. You got Denzel Ward. You got Greg Newsome II on the other side, and he had a good start to camp. Then he hurt his shoulder. Just came back to team drills this week. I think he's solid. I know people have questions about him. He's motivated to have a big year. So you got those 2 guys, and I think you're fine. But now we're talking 3rd and 4th corners. And Camden Mitchell, he was a 5th-round pick a couple years ago, and he's looked pretty good when he's played in his first couple years. He's had a difficult time being thrust into that number 1 nickelback role since Martin Emerson Jr. got hurt, right? So there's a guy down with Emerson out for the year with the torn Achilles. So I think Mitchell struggled in camp. He gave up a touchdown against Philly in the game. You got Miles Harden, who's a late-round pick a year ago, undersized, was hurt as a rookie. He shows flashes, but is he ready to be your number one nickel? Like, that's a big question mark. So I think these corners, I think this game matters for the corners. Even if you get Denzel Ward healthy, you got to figure out that third spot. You got to figure out the fourth spot because corners get tired. You know, they leave games with minor injuries or injuries. So you need some depth there, and they're working through that. So I think that's a key spot. I mentioned linebacker with Buki Watson. You know, they've had some injuries there with Mamu Diabate. He's going to make the team, but he hasn't practiced in a while. Winston Reed's out with the back injury. They need to figure out linebacker. And then at receiver spot, Chud. I mentioned Gage Larverdin. He's had a really good camp, good preseason. He's an undrafted rookie. Does he make the team, or do they think they could get him to the practice squad? Caden Davis has better size than Larverdin. So, in my opinion, he would make the roster first. But he could be the victim of Isaiah Bond and Deontay Johnson. I think those two guys are the guys we're talking about. So does one of them blow the coaches away or the organization away Saturday afternoon and lock down a roster spot? I think that's possible.
All right. Well, I can check off Ward injury and secondary issues off the list now.
There you go.
That's good. That's good. Efficient work. So would you say that the top two positions to concentrate on then are cornerback and wide receiver?
I would say so. Yeah, I think there's backup offensive linemen and defensive lineman jobs to be won. There's a really good battle going on at the end because they have so many guys. KJ Henry had a pick 6 last week, and I don't expect him to make the roster, but he's shown up. They spent money on Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and I like him. He's got great size. He hasn't done a ton. I think he's on the roster, but, when we talk about, who could be a surprise on Tuesday, cut down day. Could he be one? I just have my antenna up for that. And that could also be a trade. Like, they could try to trade from a surplus for a weakness. And I would say defensive end in particular is their deepest surplus. And can they spin that into a running back or a cornerback? I think Andrew Bayer would love to do that.
All right, let's finish out with Myles Garrett. He was asked yesterday about his latest speeding ticket. He was asked 3 times and wouldn't answer all 3 times. What do you think about that? You were there. I mean, you saw it. What did you think about it?
I didn't think Myles handled it well. And, I've been positive about Myles since he's been here for the most part. I think he does a lot of great things on and off the field. I didn't think he handled that well. I don't think he should be driving 100 miles per hour. And I think he should say that. And, I get that he doesn't want to answer a bunch of questions about it. Could he have said, hey, I should not be driving that fast. I should have learned my lesson after my 1-car accident. I need to be better. That's not a good example. I need to slow down. I agree with Coach Stefanski, but I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Like, I think that would have been the way to handle it, not it's personal, let's talk about football. I just think you have to take some responsibility there if you're Garrett. And by not admitting the mistake, I think it leaves a gray area that it wasn't a mistake. And it is. Driving 100 miles an hour is a mistake. We know what bad things can happen. I get it. He's in a Ferrari. They go fast. I get that that's enticing. A deer could run across the road on 71 by 82, and the worst could happen. So he needs to slow down, and I think he should say that.
God, it's amazing you just said that about a deer, because I almost opened up with, when you asked me how it's going, I hit my first deer ever.
Oh, my God.
On the way to work this morning. Just darted out of nowhere.
Were you on the highway?
No, I was on Clegg Road.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and it was scary, man. But we don't need to get into full details on that. But wow. I guess I'm just backing up your point. It can happen to anyone at any time. And you're right. I mean, I just think here's the thing. I mean, Shedeur made all the right comments about his. Now, you're comparing a rookie to a veteran, but just the whole look with Myles. I just feel like, man, I said this on the air this morning. You have kids that look up to you. My daughter went to the Morgan Wallen concert and was so excited when Myles Garrett came out with Morgan. He's her favorite player. And I have to be honest with you, on a franchise like this, where like you don't have a lot for young kids to grasp onto, and we've lost fans over the years for their crappy play and performance and decisions. He's a guy that young people can latch onto. He's got to realize that, and know that there's young kids that look up to him. And I know I've said this before too. Athletes shouldn't be kids' heroes, but they are. And he's got to remember that. And the other thing too is he's a leader on this team, and he's been questioned by the media and fans about being a leader. Whether that's fair or not, he is. So I just wish he would have handled it better. I'm not mad at him or anything. It's not going to affect my day really.
Right.
But I just think I agree with you. Just handle it a little bit better than that.
And then he talks about how he's taken on a bigger leadership role, and there probably is some separation there between football leadership and life leadership. And I don't know if guys look at him any differently. I mean, he's such a great player, right? But it does feel a little contradictory when he talks about that. And I think people know, but again, I'm going to say it again because it's super important. It's the context. And the context is less than 3 years ago, he got in a one-car accident and rolled his Porsche, and he and the passenger were hurt. Now, luckily, they were minor injuries, but he missed the game, and then he was banged up the rest of the season. He's had, I think you guys, Chud, KYC had him with 8 speeding tickets since he's been a Brown. I know that he's been clocked at 100. This is at least the 3rd time. So it's not like he's a first-time offender here. And I think, right, it's the not learning from the mistakes that I find the most troublesome.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, buddy, unless you got anything else, that's it for me other than how about the Ravens? They're going to celebrate 30 years with the Browns in the building.
Right. I mean, that week 2, and I found out I'm going to go to Baltimore. I mean, you never know, but I get cleared to go to Baltimore, which is great. And I mean, it's Joe Flacco returning to Baltimore, which has got its own storylines. It's a division game. It's Lamar Jackson. It's all that. Are the Browns 1-0, trying to go 2-0 in the division? Are they trying to avoid 0-2 and maybe 0-6? There's gonna be so much on the line. And then the Ravens decide to celebrate the 30 years of the franchise. And of course, in their announcement, it doesn't say anything about ripping the team away from Cleveland, but everybody in Cleveland understands that, right? So there's a lot of background there, a lot of background, a lot of storylines for that week 2 matchup. So I think that's an exciting one, and that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. All right. Have a good day out at practice today, and we got a ball game on Saturday, roster cuts, and then we'll do it for real against Cincinnati. Yeah, we got a lot going on. So, we'll talk. We'll probably talk next week after roster cuts, Judge, because then we have an idea, right, where it looks, where it stands. Then the players get a little break, and then they're back Labor Day to start the run up to the Bengals in earnest. So, a lot coming up soon. So, I appreciate it, Chud, as always. I appreciate everybody listening. This has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast, and you can read all my work at brownzone.com. Thanks.